Hi Mr. Harold, this is my reflection video on Christo's coaching session. Christo used the TGFU framework in his coaching session and was very clear about each section of his framework. For Game 1, Christo made use of shaping play pedagogical method to exaggerate certain actions. So let's start with shaping play. So rules are set to reward specific defensive actions by Christo. For example, interceptions and retaining possession after each interception gets point for the team that tries to do it. So this emphasizes the value of defensive position and control. So next, if the ball goes out of bound after interception, the defensive action is not rewarded a point, and this encourages players to focus on precision in their defensive maneuvers by retaining control to capitalize on scoring opportunities. So these are the rule modifications to encourage defensive efforts done by Crystal, which is very good. So next, point incentives on defensive strategies. So additional points are rewarded for winning the ball in certain zones. So if a player wins possession of the opponent's half, they earn 2 points, and this promotes applying pressure. So with these rules in play, Crystal really tries to exaggerate on regaining possession of the ball and pressing the opponents for the defense side, as points are rewarded for interception and winning the ball on the opponent's side to get extra points. So moving on to the Q&A portion of the session, I felt that this was the best part of the whole TGFU framework that Crystal has done during this video session. So Crystal showed effective coaching practices. So let's start. So Crystal asked players questions to prompt them to think about why behind the rules and tactics, such as what is the purpose of implementing these rules and why do you think these rules are implemented. So this question pushed players to understand the rationale behind the high pressing and defensive part of the game rather than just executing them. So this approach guides players to consider how their decision affects how the game flows, and it deepens their understanding of tactical concepts like pressing your opponents. So next, Crystal used questions to make players recognize some critical areas, such as when you're trying to press your opponents, what happens to the opposition space? Uh, do they get more space or less space? And what was the area that wasn't being pressed? So open areas, for example. So these questions help them to identify gaps in their positioning and pressing strategy. So next, Crystal uses cues and by checking the player's understanding of body positioning by asking cues and questions such as how do you approach and why do you slow down? And these such questions connects physical movement and tactical objectives by reinforcing the position and speed that is crucial in regaining control. So Crystal also tries to build team responsibility by asking questions like who should have covered that ball, or when you see your two teammates go, what do you need to do? So these questions reinforce the importance of the collective responsibility in the defensive tactics. So all in all, this Q&A portion really guided the students by making them reflect on their plays that did during the game 1 and how their plays will affect their teammates as well. So Crystal did a good job by allowing the students to answer and not just feeding them the answers straight. So that's a really good point for the Q&A. So let's move on to the practice segment. So Crystal did a really good job by demonstrating the skills and explaining it well to the students. So Crystal sets up practice drills that closely mimics the real game scenario, such as focusing on high pressing and defensive organizations. So these drills are aligned with the session's technical objective and allows players to apply these concepts directly in certain scenarios that might happen during the game. So progressions is evident in Crystal's instructions to first focus on positioning and then moving on to more challenging aspects like the timing of the press and body positioning. So this gradual progression helps players to master foundation skills before advancing. So Crystal also introduced cues like fast approach or slow down, which help players understand how to approach and contain opponents effectively. And by emphasizing on such cues repeatedly, Crystal ensures players develop such control needed for effective defense and pressing. So Crystal also provides specific and real-time feedback during the practice, which reinforce actions like maintaining the right body angle or how to slow down when you're near the ball. So these feedbacks focus on the detailed mechanics of effective pressing and helps players to refine their approach based on the strict guidance by Crystal during the practice. So lastly, moving on to game with this before moving on to game two, with these practices in and game-like drills, Crystal helped maintain a relevant game objective and reinforce defensive tactics within the session objectives as well. So lastly, moving on to game two, students will apply what they learned in the practice task to game two, and alongside with Crystal, he will guide them by freezing plays and teaching them what is done well or can be improved. So Crystal emphasizes on critical tactical skills that were introduced earlier in the practice, such as high pressing and covering open space. By revisiting these skills in Game 2, Crystal reinforces their importance and encourage players to refine their understanding and execution during the game setting. So specific instructions were given by Crystal on positioning and pressing tactics, such as cover the middle and press as a team. So this helps players to deepen the grasp of high pressing and by practicing it with greater emphasis and attention to detail. So importantly, Crystal also used the freeze play during the game too. And by using freeze play, Crystal could pause the game at crucial moments to highlight specific tactical errors or good things that players did. So this allows the coach to provide real-time feedback while players are in their respective last possession and position that is required to make adjustments, making the feedbacks more relevant. So this approach helps the players instantly connect their position and movements with the coach feedback by reinforcing spatial awareness and understanding of pressing strategies. Ultimately, Crystal had an amazing coaching session, and there is a lot for us to learn from this video. So that's all.